So I had just played a concert recently and someone asked me, how do you memorize things? So I thought I'd make a video about how memory works at the piano. So memory is a complicated subject, but basically when you're memorizing something, you're layering different kinds of memory on top of one another. So what kind of memory techniques are there? What are the different kinds of memory that you're layering on top of each other? Well, first of all is muscle memory. You teach your muscles to do a certain thing, you memorize a passage, and your body can remember the physical motions that you use to play the notes. Now this is pretty simple when you're playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and it's pretty complicated when you're playing advanced piano works. All right, so that's number one, muscle memory, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, I want to say that you should not rely only on muscle memory. If you do, this is what can lead you to become prone to memory slips in a performance. But muscle memory is actually one of the most important memories that you have, even given its limitations. And that's why you really want to layer other things on top of it, because muscle memory alone will sometimes desert you or fail you in key moments, especially when you're under stress. The thing is, when you're playing any of the memory techniques that I'll talk about can desert you under stress, which is why you want to have layers of them. Another kind of memory is knowledge about the piece. And this is knowledge about the harmonies of the piece, about the structure of the piece. So, for example, if you're playing a sonata, you want to know that the first movement of the sonata is probably going to be in sonata form, where you have the exposition of the theme, then you have the middle section, which is the development, where the keys may change a bit in terms of harmony, and then you get back to the recapitulation, which is a repeat of the first part. This is traditional sonata form for the first movement of a sonata. So if you know that, it really helps you structure things in your mind. You can group things. You say, okay, first I'll play the exposition, then I'll play the development, then I'll play the recapitulation. And that's only 3 sections of the piece that you really have to remember. Why is it important to only remember 3 sections of the piece there? The human brain really can only remember 5 or 6 things at a time. And so you want to be able to chunk things down into easily rememberable chunks. And you can give them nicknames, or you can visualize things about them, but as long as it's only a few, you should be okay. And even really, really complicated, really long pieces, you want to chunk down into a few things. So number 1 was muscle memory. Number 2 is knowledge about the piece. All right, what is another type of memory? Visual memory. So I think in this, you can put down 2 things for visual memory. And maybe these are different types, but they're both kinds of visual memory. One is visually remembering the score. So it's like you taking a photograph in your mind of what was printed on the page, and you're remembering it, and then you're reading off of that remembrance of the page. So I do this when I'm playing. I mean, I guess it's kind of like a photographic memory, if you've heard this term before. But I think you get better at it as you go along. So I like to use the same score, mostly, although I'll check different scores for accuracy and things like that. But mostly I want to use the same score so I can harness this feature of memory, that I can visualize the score. Okay, this one takes place at the top of the page. This thing takes place on the left side or on the second line of the page, or something like that. So that's visual memory of the page itself. Then there's also visual memory of how your hands might appear at the keyboard. For me, I don't tend to use that very much, although I'm sure it's involved somewhat kind of on a subconscious level. But that's kind of more tied into muscle memory, where I can play basically almost as well with my eyes closed as I can with my eyes open, but there's a little bit that opening your eyes can give you in terms of certainty and where you're jumping to on the keyboard. All right, so far we have muscle memory, knowledge about the score, including the structure of the piece and the harmony, and then visual memory. And Of course, aural memory, A-U-R-A-L, aural memory is going to be really important as well. That's another kind of memory. That's how the piece sounds. So this is really, really, I think, one of the fundamental types of memory, is why you want to develop your ear training when you're studying piano or other music. If you're playing through the piece, and this can come into play in a couple of different ways. So number one is kind of figuring out a trigger to like what's coming next. So you hear a certain part of music, and then you figure, okay, well, I know what's coming next because I just heard that part. And that is actually happening all the time when you're memorizing longer works, because it's very, very difficult or impossible to remember everything all at once. Having triggers like that based on the sound of the piece can help you. For example, played Chopin Ballade No. 1 recently, and in that piece, so I think, okay, we have the introduction, which goes up an A-flat major chord, arpeggio, and then eventually winds us to our key of G minor. So there I'm thinking about the notes on the page, but I'm also thinking about the harmony. And I'm also using that as a trigger, the aural sound of it, what I'm hearing, as a trigger for what comes next. So, and I'm also grouping it as kind of knowledge of the piece, as I'm listing one part as the introduction, and then when I get to the key of G minor proper, that's kind of like the very beginning of the piece, past the little introduction at the beginning. So there I'm using all those four types of memory right off the bat. Then you just want a fifth type of memory, I think, is taking note of things. I don't know how to categorize it really, but taking note of things, like taking note of differences. So for example, in the Chopin Ballade, in the opening, there's a chord where you're playing the notes G, A, and C sharp before resolving to a D major chord. But later on in the piece, when the same theme comes back, that A becomes a B flat. So you have G, B flat, and C sharp. And like taking a special note of that difference allows me to remember what is going on at the beginning of the piece versus what is going on at the end of the piece. So that's taking a special note of differences. All right. So then I think you can also think about different categories within these categories. So for example, with muscle memory, one of the things that I think you want to be aware of is fingering. And I think that helps with the muscle memory. And that's why I think fingering is really important. In fact, it's if you watch one of my other videos that may or may not have been made or been published yet, I talk about fingering and why it's so important for the piano. But it's actually a topic that people, I think, in general, don't realize how important it is. In any case, fingering can be part of muscle memory. If you remember how to move your hands, fingering, but it can also be part of the other kinds of memories too, where, say, for example, you wrote down which fingers to use on the page, and then later on you're remembering, okay, I'm using this finger or this other finger to do it. So when you're memorizing a piece, you layer all these different kinds of memory on top of each other, and you may access one at a certain point in the piece and then another at a certain point in the piece. But at the very minimum, you're using your muscle memory, you're using your aural memory to understand, did I play a wrong note there? And am I playing a leading tone that's going up to, say, resolving to the tonic note in this chord, for example? I'm using my knowledge about harmony to help me understand things and help to group things. I'm using my knowledge about like the sections of the piece to help me group things. So for example, I'll give you another example about the Chopin Ballade No. 1. So after the introduction, then you have the main theme in G minor, and you kind of go along in G minor for a while. And then at some point, you have like a B flat major chord that transitions into a D minor chord, and you end up with an E in the bass, and you're in the key of A minor, with the, E or E7 chords being kind of the dominant there. And That's the middle section. Dum, bum, bum, bum. Apologies if I'm not singing it in the right key. We'll talk about perfect pitch also in a different video. So anyway, so that is one way that I'm thinking about it. And those sections just kind of flow. And when I'm narrating this to you, I'm thinking visually about the score. I'm thinking about the sections, and I'm trying to hear it in my mind too, to help with the oral memory. Like, how does one thing flow from one thing to the next? So I'm really using all of these different kinds of memory when I'm narrating to you what's going on in the piece. Now, for me, it helps. I mean, I can try to play the piece through in my mind, but having the physical, the touch of the keyboard and the actual sound, that really helps me a lot not to get stuck. And it also helps you realize how sharp is the resolution of your memory. Like, do you just see things as a blob, or can you kind of determine all the little details going on? And I think to really play from memory at a high level, you have to remember all the little details. And so that's why I want to go over in another video, when do you know if you have memorized something sufficiently to leave the score behind and get up there on the stage without the music. Now, some concerts, you really don't have a choice, because say you're playing with orchestra or something, and it's just going to be much more unencumbered if you have it memorized. And or maybe that's a requirement of whoever's hiring you to perform. Sometimes you'll have a choice whether to play from memory or whether not to play from memory. Or you could have a choice for yourself and just say, I'm always going to play from memory. That's just the standard that I want to set for myself. But if you do have a choice, it's a real interesting question. When do you play from memory, and when do you not play from memory, and how do you know the difference? And so that's another video I'm going to be making. Anyway, if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe. I think one of the things that as the channel is growing, one of the things that you can really do is watch a lot of the longer videos. That's where currently the channel hasn't had a lot of traction. People are watching the short videos and enjoying them, and I'm so glad for that. But if you want to watch the longer videos, like and subscribe them. I think that will help things. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.